Hi, in this video, I'm going to walk through how to build and configure a renewals pipeline in HubSpot. We're going to set up automation to move deals from our initial sale pipeline to our renewals pipeline, and then manage the movement of subsequent renewals through that pipeline as well. So what we're looking at here is a standard deal pipeline in HubSpot. I've set this up for renewals, and I've broken up my stages by the time until the renewal. So you'll see here we have 6 to 12 months, 3 to 6, 2 to 3, 1 month, and then closed one. And ultimately, these time periods could be whatever you want, and we will adjust that in a later workflow. But you'll also notice here that I have the deal tag on these deals for renewal. That is because at a later date, we will add the ability to add upsells and cross sells into this pipeline as well and manage that all together. So we'll want to denote those differently. But this particular deal tag for renewals is based on the deal type property, which I'm using initial sale, renewal, and then upsell or downgrade as the tags. So let's get into our first workflow to move deals into this pipeline itself. So if I click to this handoff close one deals to onboarding renewals, we're going to trigger this workflow when a deal stage is closed one in our sales pipeline. So this might be named differently for you, but in our initial sale pipeline, check that we have the data that we need to move on to the next step. And then this is the action that we're going to care about, creating our first renewal record. So we're going to create a deal. We're going to assign it to the existing owner of the deal. That might be different for you if you have an account manager or somebody different managing things beyond the initial sale. But then we are going to set the deal name equal to the renewal for deal name because we want it to be the current company and then year one. I'll show you in another workflow how to make this dynamic and make sure that we always have the latest renewal year in the name. We're going to add it to our 6 to 12 months. We're assuming an annual renewal here. So we're setting 365 days out as our close date. This is going to be a renewal type deal, as I mentioned earlier. So that deal tag gets set. Renewal year is going to be one. This field I'll mention later in a workflow, but setting renewal year type to odd. This is going to help us get around a HubSpot limitation when it comes to creating records in workflows in subsequent sort of cycles. Then we're going to copy over anything else that we need to be available on our renewal deal. So we have amount, success metrics, persona, and then this one, sales deal name, we're just going to set to the current deal name because we'll use that in our dynamic naming in just a second. We're also going to pull in all the associated contacts, companies, tickets, everything that was with the sales deal to be on renewal deal. The remaining steps in here are creating a new record for onboarding and setting a Slack notification. Not particularly important for our renewal process, but creating the record here is the first step. So if I go to the next workflow, that first workflow is going to create a deal over here. So what happens when we move a deal to closed one? Let's say it's the end of their first year, the renewal period has ended, they're going to start the next one. We can use a workflow to automate the creation of that next deal too. So I'm going to go to this first workflow, create subsequent deals in our renewal pipeline, odd. This might seem a little strange. I'll mention why in just a second, but this is odd. So the first thing we're going to do is enroll deals in this workflow when they are in the deal stage of closed one in our renewals pipeline, and they have the renewal year type, which remember we set in our sort of sales handoff workflow to be odd in this case. That's what's going to enroll them in this workflow. Then we are going to, this is an optional step. I always recommend copying the amount of this deal to a company property, just increase the visibility of what's going on with this account at renewal. But then this is the important one, creating the next record in our renewal pipeline. So this is going to look very similar to the create record action in our initial sale workflow, but you'll notice some differences here in the deal name. We have renewal for sales deal name. So we want to use that original sales deal name, which didn't have the year and renewal year concatenated to it. So we're going to use sales deal name. And then we have year. This is going to follow the same format as before. But then we have this next renewal year. And just to show you what that looks like, next renewal year is a calculated property where essentially to be able to get the dynamic renewal year, we're just taking our current renewal year property, which will always be tracked on the current deal. And then in a calculated property, we're just adding one to it. So that means that we can always use it to say if the current renewal year is one, this next renewal year property will have a value of two, which means when we create this subsequent deal, we can say renewal for original sales deal name, year is two. Below that, everything is going to be exactly the same as previously created by renewal workflow. The deal type is going to be renewal again. But then this renewal year type, because we're in the odd workflow, we want to set this to be even. So this, again, the HubSpot workaround that we need to enable here is because HubSpot will not allow you to create an infinite number of records from the same workflow. The reason for that is that you could end up putting HubSpot in a sort of infinite loop and causing all sorts of problems that way. So we're going to bounce the creation of new records in our renewal pipeline back and forth between two essentially identical workflows. The only difference being that one will run when the renewal year type is odd, one will run when the renewal year type is even. Everything else here, making sure that we're copying a renewal year, again, using that next renewal year property, again, copying over the sales deal name so that we can keep using it in our dynamic naming. So again, associate all of the good stuff that we want along with this deal. So that's the first workflow that's going to create subsequent deals on our renewal pipeline. This next workflow is essentially the same. You could create it just by cloning this one. And then the thing that you'll need to change is in the trigger, change renewal year type from odd to even. And then in the create action, you need to set renewal year type to odd instead of even. This renewal year type should always be the opposite of what is in the enrollment criteria for the workflow. So that is creating new deals in our renewal pipeline when they move to close one, copying over all the relevant information. The final thing that we are going to do here is automate the movement of deals through this pipeline based on the time until renewal. So you could set up your renewal pipeline without this automation. You could set up your renewal pipeline with entirely different stage names. Maybe you don't want to have time-based sort of movement through the pipeline. So you could stop at this point, is sort of my point here. You're already automatically creating renewal deals from your sales pipeline. And when a deal moves to close one in your renewals pipeline, you're creating the next year renewal, making sure all the data is all together. But let's go to this last workflow, which is going to be to move deals through our renewal pipeline based on the time until their renewal date. So to do this, we're going to use another property, which I'll show you in just a second, of days to renewal, which is essentially a count of the number of days until the renewal date or close date on that particular deal. And we're going to run it only when a deal is in our renewal pipeline. So days to renewal, if I just go back over here, and I can show you how we are calculating that property. We are using a calculator property with the time between type, and we're going for the start date of today's date, which I'll include a link to set up the workflow if you do not have HubSpot Pro in order to set that up. Otherwise, you would need a workflow that is incrementing today's date. You could schedule it to run every 24 hours and update that. And then the end date is going to be the renewal date on our deals. And then once we have that information, we are going to use the days to renewal in an if then branch to sort of branch and categorize where in the pipeline a particular deal should be. So if days to renewal is greater than 182 to 90, 90 to 30, less than 30, we're going to set the deal pipeline stage appropriately, 612, 3 to 6, 2 to 3, 1 month. And then make sure that we're handling the exception. If for any reason that data gets out of range, make sure that we're handling that and surfacing that appropriately. So the really cool thing about automatically moving your deal through your renewal type pipeline based on the days until the renewal is that you can start to then trigger all sorts of interesting things, right? You could say when a deal, let's say you want to kick off your renewal process 6 months before a renewal date, you could say, okay, when the days to renewal is X, create this task, run this playbook, send this email, notify this person, create a success plan or renewal playbook, like whatever it might be. You can do all of that based on the time until the renewal. And you could also combine that with other data. So let's say that you have health scoring or you have some indication of maybe it's you want to spend more time or start the renewal process earlier with a certain segment of customers. You could absolutely do that. You could set that logic in a workflow that just says, enroll this deal in this workflow to kick things off when days renewal is less than X. And they also have this other property. Let's say it's health score is at risk. You want to start that process earlier, maybe than a healthy account where you are okay starting it a little bit later. But hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully this video wasn't too long. I would love to hear your feedback on this process. We'd love to know how you're setting this up yourself. I will also follow this video up with another on how to set up upsells and cross sells and manage things that are sort of within the renewal periods that are not just the sort of standard okay, this got to the end of the renewal period and renewed at the same amount kind of situation. Thanks so much, and look forward to hearing what you think.